I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the Korea-Africa Summit. South Korea and African states have agreed to build up their cooperation in essential fields, including key minerals. And today, the leaders will continue to explore their collaboration in the field of economy. The 2018 Inter-Korean military agreement that was signed to defuse military tensions at the border is now suspended in response to mounting provocations coming from the north. Military activities along the border can now take place at any time. And U.S. President Joe Biden says the North's security challenge is equally as threatening as it was before when asked if North Korea is getting more provocative, referring to whether North Korea issues were worse during the Trump administration. The second and last day of the Korea-Africa Summit today will stretch out to a grand-scale economic event. Major government officials and business leaders from the two sides will gather for a business summit. Let's turn to our Choi Min-jung for details. Min-jung.
Dami, it's day 2 of the Korea-Africa Summit, and as you said, soon leaders and delegations from South Korea and Africa will be participating in the business summit hosted by South Korea's Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy. President Yoon and President of Mauritania and Chairperson of the African Union, Mohamed Ould Ghazouani, will deliver keynote speeches at the opening ceremony. African heads of state, major government officials, business leaders, and economic experts will also be there to discuss agenda items such as industrial development, trade expansion, food and mineral security, and climate change, all of which are mutual interest to both Korea and Africa. Business leaders from Korea's Hyundai Motor Group, LG Global Strategy Center, POSCO Research Institute, and Tucson Enerbility will also be attending. Now, on the sidelines of the event, there will be the signing of MOUs between major economic organizations of South Korea and Africa, including the establishment of a Korea-Africa Economic Committee. The aim is to enhance Korea-Africa economic cooperation and create a robust framework for business initiatives.
Right, Min-jung, and besides the significant business summit, we hear there are more side events on Korea-Africa partnerships taking place today as well. Tell us more about that.
That's right, Dami. There are several side events scheduled throughout the day. South Korea's Foreign Ministry and the Korea International Cooperation Agency will host a Korea-Africa Future Partnership Conference focusing on development cooperation strategy for empowering future generations. There will also be forums on youth startups, infrastructure, as well as agriculture. These events are hosted by Korean government ministries and organizations and will be attended by delegations from multiple African nations. This is all I have for now, but I'll be back with more updates in our later newscast. Back to you, Dami.
All right, Min-jung, thank you for the coverage. And also, President Yoon discussed ways to strengthen mineral cooperation and development assistance with leaders of 4 African countries on the sidelines of the Korea-Africa Summit on Tuesday. In a bilateral meeting with Madagascan leader Andrea Rajoelina, Yoon discussed the two countries' cooperation in core minerals and agreed on strengthening Korea's assistance in cultivating high-quality rice. Meeting with Kenyan President William Ruto, Yoon said he hopes to expand cooperation in infrastructure and food security, while agreeing to start talks on signing an economic partnership agreement and complete the construction of a Kenyan Institute of Science. Yoon also reviewed bilateral trade and investment ties with Ghana, with his counterpart requesting Korea play a bigger role in infrastructure projects. The South Korean leader also met with the president of Liberia and discussed economic and democratic growth. On Wednesday, the Yoon will hold bilateral meetings with the leaders of Mauritania, Equatorial Guinea, Comoro, Botswana, Eswatini, Central African Republic, and the Seychelles. He will also meet the chairman of the African Union Commission. So yesterday, on day 1 of the summit, the leaders discussed their vision of shared growth, sustainability, and solidarity. And they agreed to expand cooperation in many fields, including key minerals. Our correspondent Oh Soo-young has the details.
South Korea and African nations have agreed to establish a critical minerals dialogue and increase cooperation on infrastructure, digital technology, and food security. This came in a joint statement following South Korea's first standalone summit with African countries on Tuesday, attended by 48 member states of the African Union. President Yoon and African Union Chair President Mohamed El Ghazouani of Mauritania highlighted the 7 major areas of cooperation under the theme of shared growth, sustainability and solidarity.
한 아프리카 관계의 새로운 장을 열게 된 오늘 회의에서 참석자들은 함께 만드는 미래를 위한 구체적 방안들을 심도 있게 논의했습니다.
We all understand that Korea can offer a lot, especially when it comes to the experience of development, human capital development, and transition to digital economy. In these ways, we have a lot to learn, and we were able to learn the growth potential of Africa.
First, to promote trade and investment, the two sides agreed to pursue an economic partnership agreement and a trade and investment promotion framework to promote more corporate exchanges. Seoul will also aim to expand its official development assistance to Africa to $10 billion by 2030 and provide some $14 billion of financing for Korean companies to tap into the market of some 1.4 billion people. South Korea and Africa also signed MOUs on building infrastructure, including roads, rails and ports, and increasing the digital capacity of African youth through educational and vocational programs. They also penned deals to strengthen cooperation on food security, sustainable farming and health infrastructure. And one key deal they struck was to establish a dialogue channel on critical minerals, which are core components for advanced digital products like semiconductors, South Korea's main export. As of 2022, South Korea has only 36 mineral mines to back the sector, compared to the United States' more than 1,900 and Japan's 134, according to the Federation of Korean Industries. Amid various regional and global challenges to peace and security, the two sides agreed to increase cooperation in counter-terrorism and humanitarian support, as well as their solidarity at the UN Security Council, where South Korea and 3 African countries are serving non-permanent terms. Also, the two sides emphasized the international community's push for the complete, verifiable and irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. To further develop their cooperation, they agreed to increase bilateral exchanges between governments and businesses, as well as in culture, sports and academia. To ensure continuity of their agreements, South Korea and Africa will hold a foreign ministers meeting in 2 years' time and establish high-level consultative bodies on economic cooperation and agriculture.
Marking a new chapter in Korea-Africa cooperation, the summit creates an intersection between Korea's vision of becoming a global pivotal state, a responsible contributor to world peace and prosperity, and Agenda 2063, Africa's blueprint for sustainable development with the goal of becoming a global powerhouse. 오수영, Arirang News.
And diplomatic and economic exchanges between South Korean and African nations will go way back from the Korean War to independence days for African states. Hopes are high that the summit will further solidify their lasting friendship. Our Kim Do-yeon tells us more.
At the first Korea-Africa summit, with 48 African nations represented in South Korea, President Yoon opened what he called a new chapter of friendship, saying that this summit confirms African nations as critical partners of South Korea, while noting that the two sides have been there for each other during tough times.
1950년 6.25 전쟁이 발발하자 아프리카는 파병과 물자 지원을 통해 대한민국의 자유민주주의 수호에 기여해 주었습니다. 1950년대부터 70년대까지 많은 아프리카 국가들이 차례로 독립을 이룩하면서 우리와의 수교는 더 활발히 이루어졌습니다.
He also noted that the summit opens a new chapter in relations. African Union Chair and Mauritania's President Mohamed Ould Ghazouani opened the response from African nations, showing his hope for enhanced cooperation.
I believe that the very reason African nations are attending this summit is because African countries are expressing their steadfast trust and gratitude towards South Korea.
Rwandan President Paul Kagame said, quote, "South Korea is a global pivotal state. Africa is a global pivotal continent. This summit should have happened sooner." South Korea needs to share its experience of success, while Africa has a lot of must-learns from South Korea. And the Central African Republic president said, "We request South Korea to develop human resources for the conservation and development of Africa's vast forests. We hope for mutual growth between Korea and Africa through decarbonization." This two-day event was held just outside of Seoul in Goyang, Gyeonggi-do province at Kintex, the largest exhibition facility in South Korea. This is the biggest multilateral summit that the Yoon administration has hosted. It was much anticipated after President Yoon himself announced the plan to host the inaugural summit back in late 2022. With a number of participants, just the welcoming and greeting of all leaders took more than an hour in the morning. Covering the summit were reporters from all around the world, with different languages being heard at the media center to show the diversity this summit comes with. Following the morning session, the leaders gathered for a photo shoot, lunch, closing ceremony, and the joint press conference. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And it wasn't just the leaders. Media outlets from several different African countries also showed great interest in the possible outcomes from the two-day summit. Our Park Gun-woo talked to them.
I'm here on the first day of the historic 2024 Korea-Africa Summit held here in Korea. The event not only drew attention domestically, but also from dozens of media outlets in Africa. Let's get their take on the event.
Us creating a relation in terms of probably exchange, trade, and also in terms of companies, Korean companies setting up in Africa and especially in Eswatini, so that we can benefit in terms of creating jobs and obviously innovation and things like that.
He added the combination of Korea's advanced technology and Eswatini's various mineral resources could help their country develop. A media representative from Malawi also shared the same sentiment, but mentioned potential cooperation in tourism and agriculture.
And another aspect is tourism. Our country is looking forward to have as many tourists as possible coming from different countries, including Korea. Most of our farmers are still using the traditional ways of farming, advanced equipment like tractors that we know for sure that Korea does have these kind of modern equipment, agricultural equipment. So we are looking forward into those aspects of saying that Korea can help us to invest in these sectors of agriculture.
He added that the Korea-Africa Summit should act as a place where real deals between Korea and African countries actually are promoted. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
First Lady Kim Gun-hee emphasized cultural and social solidarity between Korea and Africa as she hosted the spouses of leaders attending the two-day multilateral summit. On Tuesday, Kim held a cultural program and luncheon at the Presidential Palace of Cheongwade for her counterparts from 13 African nations, including Mauritania, Eswatini, Mozambique, Madagascar, and Kenya. Kim noted the cultural and emotional similarities between Korea and Africa, given their experience of overcoming war and colonial rule. She highlighted the influence of Africa's primitive arts on modern artists, including expressionist abstract arts, as an example of how Africa has the potential to become the center of global economic and cultural development. The First Lady of Sierra Leone, Fatima Jabebio, requested support in campaigning against sexual violence and against women and child marriages, to which Kim said she sympathized and would actively consider ways that she could cooperate. Leaders of South Korea and African states agreed to launch a high-level dialogue on expanding cooperation on the supply chain of critical minerals. Let's discuss why this is a huge step with Professor Cho Bin. Welcome.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us.
Good to see you here. You're welcome.
Why such a pledge on the supply chain of critical minerals? Why is it so important?
Africa holds 30% of the world mineral reserve. Many of them are critical to renewable and low-carbon technologies, including solar, electric vehicles, and battery storage, and green hydrogen. Korea has most advanced technologies on those industrial sectors. Competition for access to the African continent, critical minerals will increase dramatically, placing Africa at the heart of the green energy future. So expanding cooperation on the supply chain of the critical mineral between South Korea and African states should ensure that both parties benefit equally from collaborative efforts. Over the past 30 years, the economic relationship between the two sides has experienced significant growth. Notably, leading Korean companies have made substantial investment in various cooperation projects across African countries, particularly in sectors like construction, energy, and critical minerals. As African development journey advanced and the developmental partnership between Korea and Africa evolved, I hold a strong belief that investment in Africa will naturally flourish, propelled by the collaborative effort between the private and public sectors.
So there's no better partner when it comes to securing the supply chain of key minerals. And the leaders couldn't stress enough how crucial it is to promote people-to-people exchanges as part of their efforts to, tighten solidarity. How can they do that?
Actually, we have a K-culture or K-dramas, and Africa has the Nollywood, which refers to the Nigerian film industry. It has been very popular among ordinary Africans. So cultural exchange can boost solidarity between Koreans and the peoples in Africa. Also, leveraging Korea's expertise in education and vocational training, alongside Africa's abundant youth population, present a significant opportunity for Africa's capacity buildings and skill development initiatives, empowering its youth and driving economic growth. Korea is also welcoming students coming from many African countries. The Global Korea Scholarship, called GKS, provides the opportunity to study at the higher education institution in Korea, both undergraduate and graduate level. In 2022, there were about 600 African students in Korea, of which 82 were under GKS. Since the 2024 summit, Korea will offer more GKS to African students.
Well, Professor Jo, I have to ask you, is there any particular country that has, lots to share and offer South Korea, or country that you think has lots of potential to become a good partner of Seoul?
Actually, it is not easy for me to pick only one African country that has a lot to share and offer South Korea. I'd like to think Ghana has lots of the potential to become a good partner of Seoul. The Republic of Ghana is a country in West Africa. Ghana is a unitary constitutional democracy. It has maintained one of the freest and most stable government on the continent. It performed relatively well in healthcare, economic growth, and human development. In turn, Ghana has a significant influence in West Africa and Africa as a whole. Ghana produces high-quality cocoa. I think Koreans like the chocolates. It is classified as a mineral income countries. Ghana has an increasing primary manufacturing economy and export of the digital technology goods, along with the assembling and exporting automobiles and ships, diverse resource-rich exportations of industrial minerals, agricultural products, primary cocoa I mentioned earlier, petroleum, and natural gas. And as of 2019, Ghana was the 7th largest producer of the gold in the world. So it has a lot of potential.
Lots to offer. Now, before I let you go, Professor Jo, let's talk about the opening remarks given by President Yoon yesterday. He stressed Korea-Africa security cooperation for keeping peace on the Korean Peninsula and Africa, especially in light of heightening tensions and provocations coming from the north. How can Africa play a constructive role here?
Actually, 54 African countries are members of the UN, and 3 of them are the elected member of the UN Security Council. As a member of the Council from 2024 to 2025, Korea is committed to contributing to fulfilling the Council's duty of maintaining international peace and security. in order for us to take the lead in the shaping discussions on the peace and security on the Korean Peninsula, as well as around the world, we need support from African countries. Korea aspires to become a global people state, which actively harnesses Korea's growing, strengthening, and capability in advancing freedom, peace, and prosperity in the international community. So we recognize the importance of the supporting African leadership and ownership in securing sustainable peace in Africa. Korea is committed to strengthening the capacity of the African Union and sub-regional organizations. The Korean government has contributed over $18 million since 2016 to support the AU peace and security activities. In addition, Korea has been actively participating in the AU-UN Group of Friends in enhancing cooperation, coordination on the African issues, both at the AU and the UN.
All right, Professor Cho, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Good to see you.
South Korea has officially scrapped the entirety of the 2018 Inter-Korean Military Agreement. Seoul's military held the North Korean regime and its repeated provocations responsible for the suspension. Our North Korean Affairs correspondent Kim Jung-sil reports.
President Yoon Suk-yeol has signed the motion that was passed by the cabinet meeting on Tuesday morning to suspend all clauses of the 2018 Inter-Korean Military Agreement.
The government has decided to suspend all effectiveness of the September 19th military agreement until mutual trust between the two Koreas is restored, effective Tuesday, June 4th, as of 3 p.m., after the decision of the cabinet and the president's approval.
The 2018 Inter-Korean Military Agreement was aimed at diffusing military tensions and preventing accidental military conflict at the border. But military officials, including South Korea's defense minister, have argued that the agreement compromises South Korean military readiness.
Since signing the agreement, North Korea has deliberately and repeatedly conducted violations and provocations, including firing artillery shells off the coast, firing missiles beyond the NLL, firing at guard posts, and infiltrating with small unmanned aerial vehicles.
Back in November, North Korea declared a virtual termination of the September 19 military agreement. This came after Seoul partially suspended a clause on aerial reconnaissance following North Korea's launch of a military spy satellite the night before.
Despite North Korea's repeated violations and provocations, our military has continued to abide by the agreement. However, since failing to launch the military reconnaissance satellite back on May 27th, the North has launched missiles, sent large-scale balloons carrying waste, and jammed GPS systems, gravely threatening the safety of our people and causing property damage.
The deputy minister added that the North Korean regime is solely responsible for the turn of events and warned of a firm response should the North engage in further provocations. With the suspension in effect, the deputy minister hinted of the possible resumption of military drills near the military demarcation line and the Northwest Islands. Such drills had been restricted by the agreement. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
U.S. President Joe Biden in a recent interview said that the nuclear situation in North Korea is equally as threatening as before, and that nuclear weapons, as long as they are available, will always be problematic. Our Lee Si-hoo has the details.
U.S. President Joe Biden, in an interview with Time magazine last week, said that North Korea's nuclear program is equally as threatening as it was before. When asked whether the situation was getting worse, he added he does not think it's more threatening. The president said that, quote, as long as there are nuclear weapons available, it's always going to be a problem, adding that former U.S. President Donald Trump was wrong in not wanting to work early on 5 years ago. When asked if it's American policy to live with a nuclear or near-nuclear Iran and North Korea, Biden confirmed that it isn't. President Biden further mentioned his visit to South Korea, quote, to reclaim the chips industry, and said the U.S. has secured $865 billion in private sector investments during his presidency. The interview took place at the White House on May 28th, where Biden spoke extensively about his foreign policy agenda. Its full transcript was released on Tuesday. Lee Si-hu, Arirang News.
Hello, I'm Lee Ji-young with the latest weather updates. If you felt too warm yesterday, you need to brace for a scorcher. Especially those of us in the capital area should notice a bigger jump in highs to 31 degrees Celsius this afternoon, feeling more like early August under strong sunshine. However, due to the rapid rise in highs, we have some passing rain in the forecast for Gangwon-do and Chungcheongbuk-do, as well as Jeollado provinces, along with thunderstorms during the day. It's Mangjong today, the third summer season term out of 6, and temperatures prove it. Meanwhile, Jeju Island will have comfortable temperatures under partly sunny skies this afternoon. Sweltering weather continues tomorrow, which is Memorial Day here in Korea. Then nationwide rain is in the forecast this weekend. With that in mind, let's take a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow, on Friday at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
You're just going to remove the head. Then we've got about 10 grams for 10 or 15 minutes. Bite-sized slices. Nice and thin and drop them. All of these veggies. It just reminds me so much of chicken and dumplings. Smells amazing.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
We are here to bring a new type of news show. New insights, new styles, and new topics every day. We are News Generation. Bringing news just for you. It's Wednesday, June 5th here in Seoul. I'm Song Yujin, and this is News Generation. Joining us today is Cheska Nainha.
Happy Wednesday, everyone.
Happy Wednesday! And Chiji.
Happy Wednesday.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of those in their 20s and 30s. Now, we're going to move on right away to our main discussion topic of the day. Today is the final episode of our three-part Africa series. So yesterday, on Tuesday, we discussed African culture here in Korea. So today, we'll flip the script and explore Korean culture in Africa. So starting off, let's take a look at the big picture. Cheska, can you tell us how many Korean nationals or those of Korean descent are currently living in the continent?
Yeah, so this was a very interesting figure for me too. So let's take a look at the screen to see the actual figures of Koreans living in Africa. Now, as of last year, the number of Korean residents in Africa was over about 10,000 people, accounting for about 0.15% of overseas Koreans. Now, the top was South Africa, which was home to about 4,000 Koreans, followed very closely by Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Ghana. And they have the largest number of Korean residents among many, many countries out there.
I see. So this is the graph shows a number of Koreans and those of Korean descent who are living in Africa. Now, I'm talking about the Korean community here, there in Africa. I kind of think that this first Korea-Africa summit, the two-day summit, which is currently taking place today, is actually the last day. I think that this would have mean something really big to those Korean to this Korean community in the continent, right, Jihi?
For sure, because Korean nationals living in Africa, they're in fact anticipating an increase in Korea's international standing after this first ever largest multilateral summit held between Korea and Africa. And they are also hoping for a more vigorous exchange in various fields as well. And on the 18th of May, in fact, last month, business people in Africa, they in fact held a meeting amongst themselves, and they're part of the International Korean Trade Association. And during the meeting, apparently, they discussed many different ways in which they can increase or enhance business ties and exchanges within Africa.
I think that some fruitful discussions were held there, and also because the Korea-Africa Summit that's currently being held right now, it's also focusing, business is one of the key sectors that it's also focusing on. So we've just taken a look at the Korean community in Africa and also how much the Korean community there is anticipating or has been looking forward to the summit. So for us to get a better understanding of Korea in Africa, as well as how familiar and friendly Korea feels to people on the continent, we've actually reached out to a Korean Gen Zer currently living in the continent. So she is Yelin Ha. Ho. She's a participant of the Global Green Growth Institute Rwanda Country Program. She'll help us answer some of the key questions we have on today's topic. So let's take a look at the screen.
Muraho, greeting from Rwanda. Hello, I'm Yoon Ho, currently living and working here in Rwanda. The Korean community here in Rwanda is about 200 to 300, with many individuals engaged in business or missionary work. But also there are a lot of young Korean interns or volunteers working in international development field, such as KOICA, NGOs, or international organizations like me. For me, I've been here in Rwanda for 11 months, working at GGGI, Global Green Growth Institute. It's an international organization which works closely with government of Rwanda to promote sustainable and inclusive green growth of the country. When it comes to K-waves, it is popular in some part of Africa, and Rwanda is no exception. I was so surprised to discover that so many people here, they know about Jumung, which is pretty classic for us. And in particular, the younger generation here, they love K-dramas and K-series, such as Kingdom or The Queen of Tears, which makes me proudly happy. However, Korea is not widely known in other aspects, I would say. So there are still many people asking if I'm from North or South. But similarly, many people in Korea is not familiar with Rwanda, and they would assume Rwanda as a dangerous country by associating Rwanda with genocide, which happened 30 years ago. But people will be so surprised to know about their remarkable growth and changes since then. So Korea and Rwanda, we have generally good relations, but I have this feeling that we can do better, we can do more to raise awareness about each other. And I hope this Korea-Africa Summit will serve as valuable opportunity for this. And when talking about the younger generation here in Rwanda, they do have strong pride about their country, how rapidly they are developing, but also they have deep respect about their culture and tradition. Culturally, they value family, and so the importance of marriage and family is pretty high. They surely have a significant pressure to marry, and when it comes to wedding, they would there are a lot of traditions remaining. For example, it is common for 300, 400 family members together and celebrate a wedding for all day long, and some of them can do for a week, which I found pretty different with our culture.
Well, some very valuable insights from Yeleen. I want to just, on behalf of our news done film, I want to say a big thank you to Yeleen for the time she took to film this video and for helping us to learn more about Africa. And now moving on back to our discussion here in the studio. When talking about Korea's ties with Africa, which Yeleen briefly mentioned in her answers, we can't forget the heartwarming, the touching stories of people who have actually brought the two cultures closer together, right, Jihi?
That's right. Well, that was an amazing interview, by the way. And among the many we know of, there's Father Lee Tae-seok, who was very revered as a doctor and a religious figure. He had volunteered to serve for the people in South Sudan during the internal conflict there, to provide medical treatment to over 300 people every day who were suffering, from internal war. And he also taught children different things, subjects, and even instruments at school in the local region, and tried to foster hope for them despite the harsh environment that they're living in. And although he unfortunately passed away at a young age of 48, he was continuously remembered as a very courageous and a very warm-hearted person. And his students are still following his footsteps as doctors, still serving for people and engaging in medical services.
I'll kind of remember the documentary that I saw on Father Lee Tae-seok. I think it was when I was in elementary school or middle school, and it was really touching because the things that he'd done for those in Sudan and for the people of Africa was just amazing. And as you mentioned, I think that it's really inspiring to see how his students actually have become doctors themselves and is kind of doing and paying back to the society what they've received from their teacher, right?
Yes.
Right. So this is indeed a very touching story that has definitely brought Korea and Africa much closer together. Now, Cheska, I guess the similar efforts are ongoing, right?
Yeah, but I want to talk about a bit more collaborative aspects. So one thing that I thought was very interesting was, as we all know, during the COVID-19, K-quarantine kind of became a very hot keyword, right? Our quarantine supplies, the way that we manage the COVID situation, sort of became a manual for a lot of international communities. Now, one thing that happened was, because it became so popular, our K-quarantine supplies export has increased by 25% to Africa. Now, in a way, I think this is one of the great ways that we can sort of collaborate on a global scale with countries like Africa, maybe in terms of global medical health and care, by maybe doing exports and imports together.
Definitely. This is like quarantine or the medical field is also is definitely another area that we're seeing Korea and Africa cooperate together. Hope to see them cooperate more.
I know,
I
think that would be very, very amazing to see the global community come together in a time of crisis like this.
Right. Maybe they'll discuss that during the Korea-Africa Summit, which ends today.
I really hope so too. I hope they're watching this and thinking about it.
Right, and now going back to cultural connections, Yelena also briefly mentioned this in her video, but it appears that the Korean wave or K-culture is becoming bigger in Africa when compared to the past, right, Cheska?
Yeah, which was actually quite surprising. I mean, it just shows you the impact of the quote-unquote global media and the broadcast. It literally knows no borders, I suppose. And now, because it is becoming so popular in Africa, I mean, K-pop kind of led the cultural wave, but now people are learning Korean languages. They want to learn more about Korean food, and especially the martial arts, the taekwondo also. And also, I think it is very common in African culture to enjoy the music and feel the group, right? So I think in that sense, K-pop definitely paved the way to bring the people together to enjoy the music and probably dance to it.
And this was like briefly mentioned by our panelist Jeonghwa, who appeared on Newsstand on Monday, but she kind of mentioned that one thing that really stood out among millennials and Gen Zs in Africa was that they really love to dance music. So when she was living in Africa for about a year, there was this one guy who came up to her and invited her to dance. So that's really seemed like a fun culture in Africa.
I would love to be invited.
Me too. Definitely. And maybe that's the reason why they're getting more interested in K-pop, right? It's so fun.
And there's a lot of group dance, right? K-pop is all about like coming together, doing like flash mobs and group dances. So I feel like it fits really well, if I hear correctly, about the African culture of coming together and just grooving to the music.
Right, definitely. Now,
and I've seen a lot of social media content covering these African people. They're dancing together. And they seem so full of joy and
energy.
They have a lot of energy, and their dance skills are just very natural.
No, it's not even natural. It's another level.
It's another level. And I watched that show on Monday when the panelists that you mentioned came out, and it was funny how that African person who offered her to dance together, she was shy, and she said, "Oh, I can't dance," and he was like, "Oh, how can a person not know how to dance?" How can a human being?
Right. So maybe we'll get to see. I hope we can see like more like collaborative dance challenges or like content where like the younger generation of Korea and the younger generation of Africa kind of collaborate together, and we could see like some kind of random K-pop dance challenge, or vice versa. We could see them dancing to Africa music.
Yes. I mean, I haven't heard a lot of tunes, but African tunes have these great beats. They really just make your heart go with the beat. And And I would love to, actually, that's a great idea. I would love to see some cross-cultural exchanges as well. Yeah.
Maybe we should try that with some of our panelists. Now, moving on, back to our discussion. We were very interested in like K-pop and cultural connections between the two, but I want to ask you, Dee, what are some other areas of exchange that we're seeing between Korea and Africa?
Well, it's not just cultural exchanges, but there are a lot of business exchanges going on as well. It's because Korea lacks a lot of natural resources, right? Not lack, but it basically doesn't have any natural resources, and it was able to develop in such a short period of time, just within a few decades, I guess because of the human resources rather than natural resources, and we have the technological capabilities, and with that and with the African natural resources and the plenty of labor force that they have, is creating like a synergy effect. And because Africa has a lot of areas that still need development and sturdy infrastructure, Korean steel companies and other like manufacturing companies, construction companies are there to help grow their regional economy as well. And we're also, of course, getting help from them as well. So there are a lot of business exchanges going on. And like Cheska mentioned earlier, our exports of the COVID-19 quarantine products jumped a lot during that period. And our products, not only these medical supplies, but also construction-related technology and the capabilities are well known in the African region.
And like this kind of came into my mind, but I think that another area that we're seeing Korea and Africa cooperate together is, have you guys heard of the K-Rice Belt Initiative?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah, so it's basically Korea like providing know-how on like rice growing technology and also way to like grow rice better so that these countries in Africa who rely heavily on rice, they can grow rice on their own so that they can rely less on imports. So I think that the MOU between the Korean government and like 8 African countries was signed last year. So definitely agriculture is another big sector that we're seeing cooperation between Korea and Africa. So that's also worth noting. And I want to say to you, T, a very good point that you mentioned is that Korea is also receiving help from Africa. It's not only Korea that is helping out Africa, but we're also helping, we're receiving help from Africa as well. So Jessica, before going on here, we talked about how some of the resources that we are getting help from Africa, like from those phones, right?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that I found quite interesting and why this is so important to learn more about other countries is that, as you mentioned, it is not a one-way street. It is also a two-way street. And you briefly mentioned it to me before going on air. But was it the gadget on the phone?
It's like one of the one of like
components of what goes into our phone is actually from Africa or made from Africa, right? So one of the very key elements of our everyday life, the resource that basically sort of creates our digital life is from Africa. So I think that's just one of the ways that we have to learn that now the global community isn't just about a one-way street, but it is really about a collaboration and an ongoing effort between the two. Yeah.
Right, definitely. And talking about ongoing collaboration and how we'll get to, we're seeing the summit going on. So I think that anticipation is really building up about how we could possibly see more exchanges between Korea and the African continent. So do you also think that we'll get to see them interact and cooperate more in the future?
I really think so. And I actually want to speak more on the cultural level because I truly believe in soft power. So yes, there are multiple business opportunities and resources that will be negotiated. But I think one of the ways that we, as the millennials and Gen Z, can really promote this effort going forward is to build an understanding that this is not just about Africa, or this is not just about South Korea, but really it's now we're becoming a global community, right? As Jihi mentioned, we can easily access a lot of dance reels, or even enjoy the lives of other people on the other side of the border. So I really hope that this Africa Summit does take what it needs to in terms of business and global cooperation. But as as the participants of global citizens, I hope we really embrace it with an open mind and see what the future can bring us.
Right, because as you've mentioned, nowadays the world is interconnected. So I think that it's more important than ever that we get to understand each other and know about each other's culture even more.
Yes.
Right. And now, Ji, do you also expect to see more like exchanges between Korea and Africa?
Definitely. And also, I've heard that we've been seeing the development of different continents one by one. I'm not sure in which order they've developed, but Africa at the moment is the least developed continent in the world, and it has plenty of room for development.
Right.
And because we're living in a globalized world, we have to really help each other. And through these exchanges, they have to be a win-win relationship, like we mentioned earlier. It's not just Korea providing help to them, but Korea also receiving help probably on the natural resources side because we lack them. And so moving forward, I'm sure there are going to be a lot of exchanges in the cultural field, the business field, as well as the agricultural field, and hopefully human-to-human exchanges as well. We can be receiving a lot of foreign students from Africa that can learn from Korea, and they can bring what they've earned from here to there to contribute to the development of their region as well.
Right, definitely right.
Actually, if I may add, on the educational level, I also think it's important because I think, as we discussed right before we started, I said, you know, it would be great if one of the panelists or one of us had traveled to Africa, right? So I hope there is more opportunities for foreign exchange students, or even just being able to actually go out there and learn about something. Because one of the things that I learned when I was studying in the States is that these opportunities to actually be in different countries itself, like physically be there to witness and interact with the people, opens your mind and eyes. It's a completely different experience than watching it on YouTube or Reels, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on like the need to open up more like educational exchange programs so that more African students can visit Korea and more Korean students can visit Africa. I don't know about what the situation is like in Africa, but for me as a person who studied in a Korean university, I think that most of my friends or people around me went to exchange student either to Europe or United States, but I think that I've never seen any of my friends picking Africa to go on an exchange or study abroad. So definitely this is important because these students are, as we always mention, the new generation. They're gonna lead the society moving forward. So yeah, these exchange programs, they definitely need more of a boost.
I know, and if there were, I would have probably went because I actually did sign up for a volunteer program at Cape Town.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then it just, there was some logistical things that I couldn't go. But at least in the United States, they actively promoted these kind of programs. So I really hope that through these kind of summits and exchanges, they do open up more opportunities for students and people like us to travel.
Right, definitely. Hope to see that we can see more opportunities. And last but not least, as I mentioned earlier, today is the last part of our 3-episode Africa series, and it's also the last day of the 2024 Korea-Africa Summit, the first ever summit of this kind. So any last thoughts or words that you guys would like to add?
Well, there are a lot of room for exchanges and cooperation, like I mentioned, and I'd like to see a lot more of Koreans promoting Korea in Africa as well, but also Africans coming in a lot more. Actually, we are all seeing a lot more foreigners here in the country, but I hope that they can also promote their countries. It's a big continent, and we often know Africa as just Africa, but there are so many different countries within Africa, right?
Cultures.
That's right. So I hope that our understanding of this big continent increases as they promote a lot more of their countries, and we provide them with the opportunities to do so here in the country.
Right. Anything you'd like to add?
You know, the saying knowledge is power. I think the first step to really understanding what love is to actually get to know about the person, right? So I hope that this summit, which was first ever, which is very, very monumental, right? But I hope this is only the beginning to many more to come. come to provide people like us for opportunities to actually get to learn more about the country. And again, like we said, more opportunities for people like us to actually travel and do a lot of exchanges. Yeah.
Definitely. And until we wait for those many more to come exchanges, NewsGen is here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks today to Cheska Dainho.
Pleasure's always mine. Thank you.
And Chichihi. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you everyone for watching. Tomorrow is Memorial Day, a national holiday here in Korea, so we're taking a day off. We'll see you on Friday. We are News Generation.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠.